Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Virtual Care Accessibility. UnityPoint Health leverages simple technology to reach its most vulnerable population. I'm Mackenzie Dean, Managing Editor with Becker's Healthcare, and on behalf of Becker's, thank you all so much for joining us. Before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation and panel, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link used to log into today's webinar to access that recording. If at any time you don't see your slides moving or have trouble with the audio, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box, as we are also here to help. With that, it is now my pleasure to welcome today's speakers. First, we have Matt Warren, who is the Managing Director of Innovation at UnityPoint Health. Matt has over 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry. In his current role, his responsibilities include the management of UPH Ventures' $100 million venture fund, strategic partnerships with innovation solution companies, and the commercialization and licensing of UnityPoint Health Innovation. Also joining us is Blake Margraff, the CEO and co-founder of CareSignal, a deviceless remote patient monitoring platform. CareSignal partners with health plans, self-funded employers, health systems, and physician groups across the U.S. to reduce hospitalizations and improve care for patients with chronic conditions. Blake previously grew the nationally recognized technology company BetaBox Labs to cash flow positive while attending Washington University in St. Louis. Matt and Blake, first of all, I just want to say thank you both so much for being here. Really looking forward to the presentation. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to you, Blake, to get things started.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mackenzie. I have to say, I am beyond excited for this opportunity. So thanks to you and the entire Becker's team. I think this conversation is really timely. I'll also share that I'm uniquely excited because skimming through the list of folks that have generously taken time today, we have leaders from truly every side of the healthcare transformation and innovation table. Everyone from telehealth, medical directors, care management, innovation. We even have a couple of folks from the venture side. So Matt, you'll be in good company here today. We're going to dive right in, and my main goal is to make sure that we cover all of these concepts with lots of time to spare for questions and answers. So please, throughout, think about areas to push the conversation, to dive deeper wherever Matt and I might be able to provide more depth. And let me talk about what we're going to share today. So we'll start off, Matt and I put our heads together, and the CareSignal team had conversations with our industry partners across the country, from California to Wisconsin to Florida. And we drilled down on 3 trends that we're seeing that we think are not only most prevalent right now, but are informing strategies for the organizations that are making the biggest changes and positioning themselves best as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll then dive right into where on earth all of this fits together, what the puzzle piece of virtual health looks like, and then how the patient fits at the end of the day. And then we're going to move briefly to discuss what exactly CareSignal is. Mackenzie already alluded to us as deviceless remote patient monitoring, which is a perfect nutshell description. And we'll describe not only how we work broadly, but how our collaboration with UnityPoint has allowed us to leverage really straightforward technology, highly accessible, to meet patients and healthcare staff where they are and drive quantitative outcomes in a very short time horizon. Matt, if you're game, I'll toss the ball to you to introduce yourself and UnityPoint Health Innovation.
Great, thanks Blake, and thanks Mackenzie, and thank everybody for joining today and the opportunity to share a little bit about the lessons that we've learned in innovation at UnityPoint and the great work that we're doing with Blake and the team at CareSignal. This slide here, just to kick us off, this really is the mission of innovation at UnityPoint. But if I were to dig one level deeper, how do I really define this, or what's the elevator speech, both internally at UnityPoint and then as well as externally. And the message that I always deliver is that for innovation to be successful, it can't be a skunk works of 10 people inside of an organization of 35,000. That's not going to be successful. And so the way that we describe it here at UnityPoint is that we really want to be an extension of every division in the organization, whether that be our physician enterprise, our call centers, revenue cycle, et cetera, so that we're out there scanning the universe for what are the innovation opportunities that we can be bringing in, and then operationalizing in partnership with those divisions to really create that growth that we need to see across the entire organization. And then on this next slide, really think of this as if I were to summarize UnityPoint's innovation strategy down to one slide. When you think about these challenges on the left, healthcare today is really being driven to revolve around the management of expenses related to chronic disease. And over the past few decades, we have just continued to shift further and further down the line the burden to the consumer, both the burden of cost and the burden of access. And so to solve these things, we really need to engage patients much earlier with low-cost solutions that have proven impact. And so that then moves us to the right, where you can see what these opportunities are and the things that we're currently implementing and using to solve those problems and challenges on the left. And that's why we've been scaling CareSignal throughout our organization. It really is helping us better manage those patients with chronic conditions. And we've been doing everything from monitoring patients and staff during COVID to monitoring our rising risk population to automating discharge calls in our call centers. And our call center volumes in the peak of COVID nearly doubled. And so these have been great solutions to help with those things.
Awesome. So to kick things off, I have a few of these trends, and I've also pulled research. And the only rule for the research that I'm going to share over the next few slides is that it has all been published within the past 6 or 7 months. So everything we're discussing today is extremely recent and hopefully really fresh for everyone who's taking the time to join. First, some researchers, I think that the principal investigators here were Bliss and George. They essentially drew an analogy to the lost energy that we see in the phase change of matter when you're melting ice, for instance, to the organizational change as CMS starts to look at potentially bringing more risk. Now, we're not going to discuss the policy side, but Matt, I'm curious about any anecdotes you can share about that happening within UnityPoint as you bring more innovation to parts of the system that maybe haven't seen it for a long time.
Yeah, Blake, I think with all these trends that we're seeing, particularly, the line that's disappearing between payers and providers, and most importantly, the need for providers to really not only decrease, but really throw their hat in the ring when it comes to creating new and alternative revenue streams. And all of these new regulations and things like that are really creating and opening up the opportunity for us to do those things.
And it's hard, right? If you're a two-physician practice, of course, any change is essentially a haircut off top line for you, but you can make the decision tonight and have it start tomorrow. That's not how it works for large systems. How do you reconcile that, especially as, like you said, we're shifting more and more to risk?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I mentioned this in the opening slide. The fact that we are looking at the organization's current strategy and trying to understand where are the innovative opportunities that connect directly to that. And we go straight to our most senior leaders in the organization that are responsible for those strategies to test and try and get their feedback on these things before taking them and scaling them across the organization.
That's super cool. And at the end of the day, you look at this slide and it's somewhat new combinations of the same ingredients. It's just the triple aim, slightly reordered with a slightly different flow diagram. So at the end of the day, it's nothing that crazy. I'd love to dive next into some rapidly evolving trends around remote patient monitoring specifically. So as we come out of the pandemic, it seems like a few things will be true. One is CMS is going to really push for remote patient monitoring to occur between the primary care provider and the patient, and there must be a relationship there. In other words, just snapping in a new kind of third-party provider arm to check the RPM box is going to get a lot harder. followed by number 2, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, right? If you want to bill for RPM, CMS is not foolish. They don't just toss money out there. That really has to be done with devices that are FDA cleared and capturing specific biometrics. So it's becoming really narrow. And third and finally, post-pandemic, only certain licenses with certain time requirements and commitments are going to be eligible. But stepping back from those changes that I think are important for all of the folks on this call to know, and that CareSignal tries to bring to the table as a strategic partner for our clients across the country. Another trend that I want to share, and this was published by Dr. Ariza, Dr. Walton, just about 3-4 months ago. Another trend is when you look at the return on investment for new innovations around remote monitoring overall, incredibly, the one thing that was really closely correlated with positive or negative return on investment in that time horizon, in that 6 to 12 months, was engagement. And Matt, you and I remember speaking about this with you back in 2016 at one of those Resi conferences. What's your take? I mean, it makes sense when you hear it, but why is engagement so important?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, I think I always like to use the analogy of a Fitbit. You tend to see that the majority of people who would pay for a device like that are the ones that are already healthy. And in most cases, you see a significant decrease of the utilization over a tool like that, 4 to 6 months in. And so, it's not just drop shipping equipment into people's homes and expecting that they're going to continue to use it, day over day, week over week, month over month. What it really creates, and this is something that we've seen in the work that we've done around monitoring, is that when they have those touch points with our providers, when the touch points are needed, they're much more effective, and you start to see this relationship that grows between the patient and those providers over a longer period of time, and that then really reinforces that long-term engagement.
Which has got to be good business. You're tapping into new geographies, you're tapping into new depths of relationships, and you're probably moving toward conditions like behavioral health conditions, social determinants of health, that are going to pay dividends longer term and have less obvious but still material externalities, I would imagine.
And not only that, Blake, but I mean, with the increasing number of patients that our providers are taking care of, and the decreasing number of providers even available, and without tools like this to continue to maintain and build that relationship with our patients, we can't meet all the demand.
The rumors were true. We really do need technology to pull this off. But that's cool. Okay, so and then we'll spend some more time on this one. I'll share some of the research later. It's pretty jarring, but when you look at the 4 most common obstacles, very roughly in sequence, kind of an informal meta-analysis of what's out there today, organizations are really proud of their digital front doors. Anyone sitting in that board meeting for their first presentation can readily use that digital front door, but a lot of patients can't. And Matt, you were sharing just a couple of weeks ago the importance of looking at health equity as a part of the strategy. How does this all tie together in your view?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we have got to have a suite of products that we're delivering to our patients and consumers in a way that they want it, right? I always tell the story that, I think historically healthcare has created one way for everything to be done and to access the organization. And the way that was usually created was what was easiest for us as providers. And, that era is over. And so now when you think about, as I mentioned earlier, creating that access and those access points for patients, it has to be multiple ways, and it has to be in ways that they want it. I mean, it's really encouraging. It's encouraging to hear, as you know, because that's really the thesis for our business. And the numbers back both of us up on that. Ogadegbe over at New York University's public health side has published quite a bit. And one of the really frustrating realities is COVID has about a 1.4 to 1.6 or even more than 1.6 fold impact in terms of hospitalizations and mortality
on minorities than on folks that are well-heeled and that aren't struggling. And a term that I came across that I'd love for you to react to, we haven't discussed it so far, is the concept of the social gradient of health, or the social gradient of health equity. I mean, what from a technology perspective, what does that mean? How do you bake that into a cohesive strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. I mean, I think that, and you're seeing this now, right, that there is being placed, and rightfully should be, and should have been probably a long time ago, a much more emphasis on these health equity challenges. And I think just how you see, if you think over the past few years, the changes that have been made to emphasize providers identifying behavioral health issues with patients, whether it be, asking the PHQ-2 at the beginning of every patient exam, you're going to see the same thing become a requirement, and it should be a requirement for providers around health equity. And we all know, right? I mean, I love to use the example of medication reminders, right? If a patient wakes up in the morning and the first thing that they're thinking about is, how am I going to feed my kids lunch today? You're not going to, I don't really care what you try to do technology-wise to remind them to take their medications until you solve their needs.
It makes so much sense. One very encouraging trend is recently a lot of folks at that intersection of research and innovation or translation are starting to put together models to assess, before it is rolled out, whether a new solution will further or will mitigate that health equity. And just seeing the other side of the coin, not assuming that just because it's technology, you're going to combat health equity, I think is a first part of the problem. At least I really, really hope it is. And that brings us to kind of an overarching synthesis before we dive more into how CareSignal sees organizations putting together their virtual strategies. And that theme is, I mean, pretty well trodden, right? We're shifting more and more toward it being time to invest in value. The shift is happening, and it's happening quickly. Again, I could share, health systems, medical groups, fully capitated groups across the country where we're seeing this. But Matt, any reaction to this, and any other reason as to why now is just such an important time to begin making these investments?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been saying this for a long time, right? This is not going to go away. I mean, there will always probably remain some aspect of fee for service, but every organization, including ours, is going all in on value-based care. And in order to be successful in those models, you're going to have to, in order for specifically health systems to be successful in those models, they have to really completely retool how they've run their organizations. And they're going to have technology to help them do that.
I'm excited. I'm excited for my parents, for my family members with behavioral health challenges. I'm excited all around. It's just a very good thing. Okay, so for those less wonky, nerdy folks on the call, this is the last bit of true hardcore research, I promise. But this one is a good transition as we think about the overall hierarchy of virtual care, of kind of that upstream to downstream flow. And this is a really surprising finding. Matt, you already alluded to the importance of rising risk. But did you know, and this is honestly, this still shocks folks, it turns out that dollar for dollar, you're going to not only bend the curve more, meaning create a greater overall gross percentage change in spend, but when you integrate under those different curves, when you look at the impact that you've had, dollar for dollar, for a lot of organizations on the value-based spectrum, it makes more sense to put investment in technology toward the rising risk population instead of focusing on bending those very high utilizers. And the necessary corollary to that is you have to invest in solutions that can scale. Anybody, well, not any, I don't want to be pejorative here, but a lot of groups, like Matt, like you said, can drop ship kits to 5, 10, 50 people, 300 people. Maybe if you're really sophisticated into the low thousands, how do you get to 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 individuals Perhaps these are Medicare Advantage folks with multiple chronic conditions. How do you scale to them? How do you really touch the rising risk pool? And I'll go ahead and here and pause, Matt, in case you have any thoughts on this from UnityPoint perspective. The way that we take to stratifying it is upstream is population health. First, you got to know who you want to help and how. At the very end, let's fast track it all the way down to the pointy end of the pyramid is virtual care. That's actually where the rubber meets the road. But what a lot of folks forget is that creamy filling of the Oreo that allows you to bring those insights to bear and to capture data longitudinally, including data that wouldn't otherwise exist, and feed that back up to the population health models in the first place. Matt, don't want to put you on the spot, but any thoughts here before we double click on the remote monitoring part?
No, yeah, just one last thought, Blake, and that is, I think our organization, like most, that rising risk population is really being managed in primary care, right? When you think about the lack of specialty care, so, CHF, COPD, they're managing that chronic patient population. And so, this large volume of rising risk population being managed in primary care in order to prevent them from being in that top category, we have to leverage technology in order to create the bandwidth to do that.
That's it, and it's a smart thing to do. At least a lot of again very recent research would agree with you there. A lot of folks are now kind of assessing the cost benefit of these different areas of investment. And one of the questions that pops up, it seems all the time, in the things that I track is whether this should happen at primary care or whether there should be a new kind of preventative population healthy sort of care delivery arm. And the consensus is it's best when it comes from primary care. You can only attack the patient from so many different angles, even when you have their best interest at heart. Now, when we look at remote monitoring, I would like to posit to folks on the call that most decision makers have a bit of a blind spot with all respect, even everything that's going on, and that is that you assume you have to either choose an expensive, generally more cumbersome device-based remote monitoring solution, or you have to sacrifice all of that clinical value and just go the patient engagement route, go with kind of a commodified solution, which is probably going to take a lot of time and elbow grease, but can scale to a huge number of folks, even though the impact won't be that great. And Mackenzie, I think hit the nail on the head here, right? What we do, what CareSignal has the privilege of doing, not only for UnityPoint, but for dozens of large health systems and payer-provider joint ventures and ACOs across the country, is kind of hit that sweet spot, that Goldilocks in the middle, with what we call deviceless remote monitoring. And what that is, what that looks like from a theoretical perspective, before I share briefly what the product is itself, is all of the clinical impact at generally, orders of magnitude the scale of traditional remote monitoring, 100 times the scale or more, but at 10% the cost or less. So you're able to reach all of these folks that research now shows unequivocally must be supported longitudinally if we are to bend the cost curve, if we are to succeed in value-based care. You're able to create not only a positive experience, but if you do it correctly, you're able to capture the same type of clinical data, that symptomatology that informs long-term clinical support that furthers the relationship with that population. And you're able to do that for exactly the folks who have the most, frankly, potential to bring financial success for you for making that investment. So in terms of how that looks, and then Matt, I'll pause here because you've known our business since truly the very beginning, right? How that looks from the patient perspective is really, really simple. It's almost embarrassingly simple from the patient perspective. It's deviceless remote monitoring because there's literally not a single piece of new technology that someone needs to add to his or her health universe. It's just your phone, your cell phone, dumb phone, smartphone, landline phone. We can even go through a concerned caregiver. And we'll get into this on the next slide. I will pause them, Matt, in case you have any thoughts, but the next slide, at the end of the day, exactly as the research is now bearing out, this stuff only works as long as it is ridiculously accessible. If someone can't access it, activate on it, and then stay engaged for a long period of time, you could have the best thing since sliced bread, but it's not going to bend the cost curve. Matt, any thoughts there? And then I'll kind of go into the 4 quadrants of accessibility that we've honed in on.
I think just the obvious one, and that is, a phone. Your phone is now a part of every part of your daily life, it seems like. And I think that includes, even my mother, who's 78 years old. She's had a smartphone for 12 years now, right? And so I think we really have to get over this, notion that the older population hasn't embraced technology. And you'll talk about the solution, even for those that don't have a smartphone, how that works and how it is working very well as well. But I just think those are things we have to keep in mind.
Yep. No, you nailed it. And I can even speak to that briefly here. So for a lot of folks that have a smartphone, flip phones are frankly less and less common, but that have a smartphone, many individuals are on pay-as-you-go plans where the number of text and phone calls they can receive are capped, right? That's especially true for government subsidized or provided phones. Now, that's a major problem because those last, 7, 10, 15 days of the month, a lot can happen. And then you lose all of the benefit that you could have had from a health perspective, from a preventative perspective. CareSignal has formed relationships with all of the major cellular carriers so that we can push messages through and receive them back at no cost to the patient. Again, it's just technology getting out of the way, right? The best technology is invisible, and that's exactly case in point. Same thing for folks that might not even be comfortable standing up to answer the phone when it rings. We can go through concerned caregivers. We can make sure that we meet someone where he or she is, not only from a health literacy perspective, but from a technology literacy perspective. And that brings me to the 4 quadrants of accessibility and success here, right? We already touched on most of these. I will say that simple as this technology seems, one of the greatest strengths that we have is the fact that we have millions upon millions of patient days of interaction data and metadata that allow CareSignal to deliver the best engagement for the longest time in the industry. We're looking at anywhere from 6-fold to about 12 times better than the next best comparable solution engagement rates. And it's because we're not only able to meet someone where he or she is, but to reach out preventatively before someone falls off. And I'll describe how that fits from a workflow perspective in just a few slides. To reach out before someone falls off. And a cool mental model here, especially for care management, care coordination leaders that have taken the time to join. It's about 10 times easier to prevent someone from disengaging with a new program, whether it's a program like CareSignal or something else. It's about 10 times easier than it is to kind of beg them, pull them back onto the platform once they've fallen off. The challenge just becomes, how on earth do you figure out who you need to support? The other challenge here, and an area where CareSignal has invested really, really heavily is, so we create condition-specific programs. I'll show you the full roster of programs that we offer. But the goal here is not just to send a text, right? The goal is to capture actionable data through evidence-based communications from those patients at the right time for a long time. And Matt, I mean, you've seen us go from just having a handful of publications as we were born out of deep research through to now a dozen, as well as lots of case studies, claims analyses. This is really important to me. You can probably tell from the start of this webinar, right? I think if you can't put a quantitative argument to the impact, first clinically and then financially, to the solution, you shouldn't be considering the solution. Because frankly, we've learned again and again, it's really hard to make decisions just based on instinct, especially when we're looking at uncharted waters like technology plus value-based care. Matt, let me pause for a sec. Anything here before we dive into the full portfolio?
No, I mean, just echo what you said, that I mean, every solution that we bring to our clinical executives, the first question they ask is, show me the data, show me the data, show me the research, right? And so it is extremely important to us to have solutions in our portfolio that have clinically validated that their solutions work.
Yep. I remember speaking 4 or 5 years ago, and the conversation was, why would you spend so much time on that, right? Even if you can do it inexpensively, that's so much energy. Just go straight to the solution, bring it to market, and you're inundated. I mean, you, everyone on this call, you're inundated in different solutions with different value propositions and fancy positioning. And at the end of the day, Either the p-value is less than 0.01 that you can drive clinical financial returns, or it's just another good idea. To that end, this was a chief information security officer, actually, with a large Medicare Advantage group that shared this quote with me maybe 5 years ago: is, don't sell me a fork with one tine, right? Don't give me a solution that scratches one of my itches today, but that I can't use for all of my strategic roadmap coming down the pipe. And I think when you look at delivering scalable remote monitoring for value-based populations, and again, we're largely talking about populations that aren't eligible for remote patient monitoring, or for whom that level of investment isn't appropriate, right? And CareSignal is focused on the value-based side of things as opposed to fee-for-service. That's why we work so hard, not only to align with the congestive heart failure, COPD, diabetes, hypertension needs. Depression is actually probably the 5th largest, but also extend to maternal health, other areas of behavioral health like opioid support, substance use support, recovery, and then a broad range of complementary conditions. And Matt, you alluded to that with the post-discharge and then the transition to long-term remote monitoring and engagement. I just point out, this is only possible when you're not investing hundreds of dollars in combined technology plus overhead per engaged patient per month. This has got to be way, way more accessible financially for the organization in order to meet those patients. Cool. Matt, I don't know if you have any areas, and this is totally up to you, but share whatever you like in terms of our work with UnityPoint. I can then also supplement with just a few anecdotes before I dive into the overall CareSignal patient experience flow.
No, absolutely. You've heard me say maybe a couple times on the webinar today, companies in our portfolio. When I say that, we're not on this path where there's going to be hundreds, right, of digital companies in our portfolio. And I think what's been really great about working with you and the other companies in our portfolio is, okay, we're starting on these things and these opportunities, but then we're building more and more solutions on top of that to tackle more and more use cases throughout the organization, and not just having a solution that's just going to solve one problem. That's not going to work.
In fact, that brings to mind, so as you know, right, CareSignal is privileged to have as one of our earliest partners, Mercy, based in St. Louis and throughout the Midwest, that was one of the earliest movers into the virtual space with Mercy Virtual and the Virtual Care Center. And that's exactly the winning approach that Mercy has taken, where they've decided where to draw a flexible line, right? It's allowed to move over time. And on one side of that line is internal investment, where they have complete control, complete agency over every part of that solution and the associated workflow, so tech plus staff. On the other side are a group of select partners, and it's a fairly small group, right? And that's where we've found there to be a winning combination. We can afford to make broader investments in a very targeted area of that stream, of that flow, exactly where we started, from pop health down to virtual care. And then, from a relationship perspective, our partners, UnityPoint, Mercy, similar, can leverage the relationship and the world-class clinical expertise that they have to make sure that the rubber meets the road long term.
The word partners, right? It's not a vendor relationship, it's a partnership, and we're building something together, because you're not going to solve these problems by yourself. We're not going to solve these problems by ourselves. It has to be a true partnership. Yep,
exactly. That's I remember at HIMSS back when that was a thing, and someone stood up and asked a panel of innovation folks, so how can I get more clients? And one of the people, this very calm, soft-spoken person on the stage, just snapped and said, break the mindset of calling them clients. First of all, that's a losing proposition from the start. Okay, let me take just a couple of moments here to talk about flow. Then we only have a handful of quick overview slides to provide context, and then we'll dive right into questions. So please keep asking those questions. I really appreciate them, and toss them in. For CareSignal, it all starts with an eligible patient list. We will work with you. We're talking about interfacing with, of course, your medical team to make sure that we're emulating and understanding your standards of care, but then also Pop Health, the finance team, the legal team, technology, and then finally operations. We'll work with you to identify the patients for whom we can generate the greatest ROI in the shortest time horizon. It's probably going to be 5,000 to 15,000 eligible individuals, could be more if you're a large group, that check the right boxes for condition and for risk and for having a clinical framework in place. We get that list of patients, and this is where it starts to diverge from a lot of solutions. We get that list and we do all of the outreach, enrollment, and activation, meaning we do all of the white labeled education, sharing this program with your patients on your behalf in a completely quality controlled way that you can audit at any time. And once those patients start activating, we're able to modulate the ramp to make sure that we stick exactly with your goals. We've truly had everywhere from, hey, I can only handle, maybe 100 or 200 patients to here's a list of 105,000, get them on as fast as possible. Which is striking, right? Like the 6-figure list of patients in remote monitoring. It's a cognitive dissonance at first. Patients then engage with their condition-specific programs. Again, white labeled, and I'll share some of the satisfaction results that we have. But from a patient perspective, the constant feeling is this is the first time someone's cared for me in years. I feel like someone's there for me. I feel like I'm supported and I have access when I need it. And then as necessary, CareSignal escalates any of the folks that might warrant additional review to your existing team. That could be a hub and spoke care model with a medical assistant branching off to RNs and nurse practitioners. That could be an augmentation of your existing care management team. That's where you've seen one health system, you've seen one health system. So we make sure to meet folks where they are on that side too. And at the end of the day, the goal here is simple: scale and elevate teams to top of license, reach patients, and then keep patients engaged in their condition-specific programs for the longest duration possible, because that's how we generate returns, not only clinically, but also for your investment in value-based care. Matt, any thoughts there? A next step, if you want to take the ball, I'll go to the timeline slide for our case study.
No, I think it's important, to call out to your point about the flexibility in workflows. And in fact, when we bring solutions like this into the organization, we are very careful to say right up front, this is already clinically validated. Like, this technology works. We're not trying to prove whether we're going to achieve these same outcomes. What we're really trying to do is understand which of these workflows is going to work best for our organization, and which of these workflows is going to let us really scale the solution across the entire organization.
Awesome. All right. So we're just going to highlight one very specific part of the UnityPoint Health CareSignal relationship. Matt and I decided to double click on this because, one, we have a full case study created, so you're welcome to access that, dive deeper. But two, I think this showcases the importance of scalability and accessibility. And I can share more as well on the clinical outcome side from a lot of different partners and groups. Matt, any thoughts just to kick it off? I know this slide's kind of self-explanatory.
No, I think one interesting anecdote here is, in all of our projects, and we work with our senior executives from a sponsorship standpoint. I just remember having the conversation with our VP of home care and our call center organization, saying, basically laying out the plan of to do this and what we were going to do, and then at the end, her asking me like, okay, so when will this start? And I'm like, well, we're going to start tomorrow. There's our ability to really accelerate the adoption of these simple tools. I think it's funny. It's something maybe a lot of health system executives aren't used to. And you can see in this tight, you can see the proof of that in this tight timeline here.
That's well described, and it's different in every single implementation, but that is always the truth. And the other truth is that we really lean into with all that you have, you meaning all of UnityPoint, that you have on your plate. The more we can take off of your plate and execute on, and be, of course, completely transparent about, right? The more that we can do that, the absolute better. Otherwise, things tend to move less quickly than anyone would like, which is the killer of return on investment. And this has worked pretty well. This is just in the context of both community-facing COVID support and then staff monitoring, engagement, and support. I think the crazy thing here that exactly replicates our experience with diabetes, COPD, other conditions, only a fraction of patients require escalation. And we'll get to it on the next slide, but of the thousands and thousands of patient interactions, only a small handful actually require that clinical escalation. Matt, anything else that stood out to you as notable?
No, I think, there's two things that historically providers have always done that have been just real head scratchers to me. One is that in the managing of chronic condition patients, they schedule a follow-up appointment, in-person appointment every 90 days. And they just keep doing that, right? 4 times a year. And it just fascinates me. What is the possibility that when the patient comes in on day 90, that is when their condition has exacerbated, And I often hear the story sometimes of a physician walking in to see the patient in the room and saying, okay, what are you here for today? And the patient saying, because you told me to schedule this appointment, right? And it's the same thing with heavy-handed care management, whether it's calling a patient every week or every other week. What's the likelihood that on Wednesday when you call, that's when the patient's condition is exacerbated again? And so with a platform like this, it really gives us the ability to monitor those patients almost, in some cases daily, and then, tell that provider or tell that care manager, hey, today's the day that you need to reach out to that patient, versus, making, hundreds, if not thousands of calls to try to see if something's wrong.
So you catch up at a bad time, like, why are you calling me? I'm doing just fine. I told you, right? Versus, and I don't know if I shared this. So obviously we work with tens and tens of thousands of Medicare Advantage populations. A couple of our partners wanted to increase the frequency of questions at the start of COVID, show that they were there, supportive, assuage the fears that a lot of folks had, especially elderly populations. Matt, you want to hear the crazy thing? Because we always poll, as you know, we always poll folks to make sure that the communication is coming at a good cadence. The trend started to increase where that patient population wanted questions more frequently. I was floored, which is also so encouraging. I mean, that's the whole darn point, right? Is use technology that doesn't cost any more when patients use it more frequently, but continue to increase the quality of experience there. And this is, I'm pretty proud of this, right? We were able to hopefully really positively impact and support both staff and community. And this is just in relation to COVID. Which CareSignal continues to offer as a no-cost suite to any health system or physician group in the country. But similar, as I said, conversion rates for different chronic condition areas that we can share. Any final thoughts? I know that was a really fast 42 minutes, and now we can shift into questions if you're game.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. All right, Mackenzie and team, let's do it. What's on the docket?
Wonderful. Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank you both for such a great discussion today. Like Blake hinted at, we have a lot of great questions already rolling in. If you have any other questions for Blake or Matt, feel free to submit those now by typing them into the Q&A chat box you see on your webinar console, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. The first questions relate to how this technology potentially integrates with Epic. So, Blake, let me ask you this first question, which is, do you discreetly integrate with Epic to begin with?
Yep, we do. It's full push-pull integration with the option for order placements to trigger or population-level shares, which we then enroll, and then custom flow sheets back. We prefer to work with Redox on the middleware side, and they have a pretty good track record of standing us up. I think our record was about 62 days from start to full integration. That said, Epic integration, including integration with the population health side of the program, is not necessary. It is sufficient, but it's not necessary for a full phase 1 go live with CareSignal up to that first multi-thousand patient rollout.
Perfect. Thanks, Blake. I think that's helpful for the audience to know. And then Matt, let me turn to you for sort of the second part of this question, which is, does Unity use Epic and its population health tools? And if so, how does CareSignal complement these tools?
Yeah, I mean, we are an Epic shop. We have one instance of Epic across the entire organization. And we do leverage some of the population health tools inside of Epic. But I would say that, I mean, any organization, right, that's an Epic, whether you're Epic or Cerner, you have to be leveraging the full suite of the product, but then also recognize where the shortfalls are and then plug in third-party technology in order to close those gaps, whether it be something like monitoring with CareSignal, or I'd say probably even on the population health side.
Wonderful. Thank you for weighing in there, Matt. And this next audience member is asking, how can you bill if CMS does not require Bluetooth metrics?
Great question. So the simple version is we don't focus on the populations that are fee-for-service eligible. We can support a combination of chronic care management reimbursement, as well as drive patients to telehealth visits for populations that are still predominantly fee-for-service. But think of CareSignal as remote monitoring for all of the folks you wish you could scale the existing fee-for-service programs to, but either financially or just by volume, that's not feasible. So I hope that helps. That's a great question, whoever asked that.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you for clearing that up. The next question is, what types of questions or surveys are sent to patients?
Sure. I tell you what, let me show you. So I'll put up here just a handful of the chronic condition programs that we have that very quickly summarizes what we track. But at the end of the day, we're usually looking to capture qualitative symptomatology. These are things like, for a patient with heart failure, do your legs feel puffier than usual? Did you wake up last night struggling for breath? For asthma, how has your breathing been? Is it better, worse, or the same compared to yesterday? And then, depending on the answer, have you used your rescue inhaler, right? I think another area that's really important to emphasize is the behavioral health suite, where most of these conditions, if not all of these conditions, must be patient-reported by virtue of the symptomatology that's leveraged in the standard of care for monitoring. So whereas for diabetes, we are asking folks, hi, what's your glucose today? What's your blood sugar? And is it pre or postprandial? Did you eat before or not? For a lot of other conditions that are really important, there's not a cuff, at least right now, that consistently shows whether someone felt the urge to use opioids, let alone whether they did. That's a great question. Thanks, Mackenzie.
Yeah, of course. And thank you again, Blake. And let me turn to you for another question, sort of resorting back to what we've touched on a little bit and Matt spoke about in terms of Epic and its population health tools. I'd love to hear from your perspective, Blake. How do you see CareSignal really complementing those tools in Epic?
That's a great question. Let me go ahead and pop back for just a moment here to, I think, where CareSignal fits at a high level in the overall technology investment strata. From a population level, those are insights that need to be applied. CareSignal is certainly not a population health analytics company. We've signed channel partnerships with Deloitte Innovator, and we'll be announcing 2 new partnerships with 2 industry-leading population health companies as well. We help those organizations that have made such robust investments. We help them and their clients, of course, largely health systems, apply those insights. And again, that comes back to generate the list of eligible folks. CareSignal gets that list. We do all of the outreach and enrollment. And then you see at the bottom of that inverted pyramid is virtual care. That's, again, where we leverage the relationship and clinical excellence that's already in place that our partners have.
Wonderful. Thank you for elaborating on that. We have another question here from an audience member who's asking, does CareSignal incorporate reliable patient-level information on their life and social circumstances into the company's solutions?
Oh, sure. Kind of like a social vulnerability accommodation, or looking at that on the index side. We do. It happens primarily by virtue of our white glove enrollment service. So not only is that service white label, not only is it coming on behalf of our partner, health system physician group, payer provider JV, or payer, right? We work with a lot of payers nationally as well. It's also a time for us to almost calibrate the experience to make sure we're meeting that patient where he or she is. Very quick example. A lot of folks that are working multiple jobs or that have shifts at non-standard business hours simply fail to interact with programs that force feed those questions down their throats. Similarly, Matt, it's right to your point. If it's a care management team that's only calling out between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and someone's asleep, then good luck, right? That's where we make sure to meet folks where they are. And then the machine learning that drives CareSignal's scheduling and long-term engagement will continue to refine and accommodate individuals over time to make sure that we're still meeting them where they are.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Blake. We have another question here, which says, how do you tie the responses and the outputs from RPM solutions to providing timely care? For example, one thing is getting to know that a patient needs care to prevent higher risk, but how do you make providers engage from that aspect or target the population?
Matt, do you want to provide thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, even prior to enrolling the rising risk population in CareSignal, we had already built reports inside of Epic to surface patients based on certain criterias that we wanted to enroll in our care management programs. And so there are dozens of factors that go into that data pool to surface those patients.
Wonderful. Thanks, Matt. The next question is, what are your thoughts on how many people feeling that RPM devices is overdoing it or might be overblowing the label of high risk? And it only means spending more on healthcare costs as we don't really want to look too far long term. What would be your response to someone with that opinion?
Yeah, go for it, Matt.
Well, I think my short answer to that is, we talked about this at the very top of the presentation. These chronic condition patients are the number one driving, they're the driver of the overall total cost and the most expensive cost. And so mostly what we focused on here today is, so how do we prevent that rising, that size of that population becoming bigger? It's by monitoring these rising risk patients in real time and creating interventions to prevent that. I don't see how you cannot do this.
Great. Well, I appreciate your insights there. Blake, let me turn this next question to you. How are you different from 100 Plus or, say, Livongo?
Yeah, so this is where I think anyone can be forgiven for getting confused. I get confused. There's so much going on in the space. I think 100 Plus is a pretty recent entrant. They seem like they're positioning themselves very well for that fee-for-service remote patient monitoring. Seems like they're really cognizant of all of the upcoming regulation, and they'll make sure that their clients adhere to that. So for that rising risk group that's still fee-for-service eligible, that kind of quadrant in the 2x2 grid, boom, that's their market. On the Livongo side, now Teladoc, I think first of all, our primary expertise, our team from a consultative perspective is designed to serve the complexity, both in terms of incentive structures and operations of providers and payers. Not so much on the self-insured employer side. I think that's where Livongo really succeeds. And moreover, we're at 30 plus chronic conditions, chronic behavioral health, social determinants of health challenges, maternal health, these areas that most companies don't touch. And we're able to do that because, I don't know if I shared this already, CareSignal has crossed the 5,000 patient mark on IRB randomized controlled trial approved studies. Truly thousands of patients. And that's not just to show that, hey, we do great stuff. Our focus on deep research and deep evidence stems from the recognition that first we need to design a good and effective product. Then we can prove that it works. But that iterative research and development phase is still hugely important. That's what drives our entire product suite as a company.
Absolutely. Thanks, Blake. Appreciate you explaining those distinctions for our audience members. This next question is, what are your statistics on reducing hospital readmission?
Yeah, a lot. And we can break it down by population, by contract type, by age, by demographic. So first, let me please encourage that awesome question asker to head to our site and select the case study, or drop me an email, Blake at caresignal.health, and I'll send it to you. At a high level, though, we see anywhere from, in our COPD publication, a more than 60% reduction, 61% reduction in hospitalization risk versus placebo control. In different populations for major chronic conditions, we've seen emergency department utilization reduction anywhere from 30 to almost 60%. And we can go then from there into not just readmission and utilization reduction, but through all the way to claims reduction with a more than 11% global claims reduction in a controlled retrospective analysis. So I'd love to dive in on that. That's a great question.
Wonderful, and thank you for the helpful response as well. Matt, let me turn to you. This next question is from an audience member asking about some of the lessons that have come out of the pandemic. The question is, what lessons did you learn from COVID-19, especially around scalability, that will apply to future technology selection?
Yeah, I think I would start with, and I think every health system probably did this, we immediately stood up an incident command center that was staffed with, both operational and clinical executives. And became our organization is set up into 9 geographical regions. And so that was really the command center sitting over top of all 9 of those regions. But I think what we learned during that period was, by doing that, how quickly we were able to actually make decisions and then that then led to changes and actual actionable items. And so one of the things our organization has done is, now that we've been able to for now, hopefully permanently, close those incident command centers, is really pause and learn from that and say to ourselves, why can't we do that day to day? Like, why moving forward can we not run our operations like that, even not during a pandemic? And so a lot of that, stand up quick decision making is now being adopted in every day-to-day operations. And so it's really created an even I don't know what the right word is, or even more access for our innovation team to take challenges and opportunities to our leadership team in real time.
Yeah, really interesting to hear, those sort of lessons and experience from UnityPoint. So thank you for sharing that, Matt. Blake, looks like this next question is for you. The audience member is asking, you mentioned that CareSignal's alert rate was around 4%. How could that vary depending on the different conditions that a patient may have?
Oh, great question. So it actually varies along 2 functions. One is time, and the other is condition. So by condition, we'll see usually ballpark 1 to 5%, 1% or even 0.5% being the diabetes population with an A1C of around 8, 8.5, all the way up to 12 or 13. And then over time, that will continue to fall as we bring that population to levels of increased and sustained control. For really tough populations, let's say polymorbid individuals with one primary diagnosis being either COPD or heart failure, we're looking at a starting alert rate per day of around 3 to 5%, depending. But that will fall rapidly as those populations are brought under control. And for those of you who are thinking, aha, that's a regression to the mean, we've controlled for that. That's an important part of making sure that we're demonstrating value, which is at the end of the day corroborated by claim improvements, right? But that regression to the mean is controlled for when we look at that long-term alert rate reduction. Final thought is that all ties back to how we scale within our partnerships to make sure that we don't overload a group, but we do fully leverage the existing capabilities. And I know I saw this pop up, and of course, all of these slides as well as recording will be available. My bad habit of speaking too quickly. So for those who want to dive deeper, reach out to us, and of course, the slides will be available too.
Great, thank you again, Blake. looks like we have time for one last question, which I'll turn to you, Matt. This audience member says, you mentioned designing patient risk-based service lines to match patient acuity to the cost of care resources. As virtual care expands, do you think organizations will match the cost of solutions to patient risk level to reach broader populations?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you have to, right? I mean, when I think about the remote monitoring space, you have on the far right, heavy-handed, we've used this word before, I drop ship the devices into a home, all the way to the far left of the spectrum of a really lightweight, simple solution, simple and low-cost solution like a CareSignal. And so, the number of patients that you can monitor, and we alluded to this before, on that lightweight, low-cost, highly effective tool works for a big portion of that population. And so in order to be successful in that, you really have to divide that population out the way that you described. And really, we mentioned this before, but I just want to emphasize this again. Our care managers, they tell us. I remember when I first got first brought up this opportunity, our care managers were managing something like only 50 patients, right? And think about that. Like, that's not scalable when we're talking about the need to manage thousands and thousands of patients. And so this really extends their reach.
Absolutely. I think you make a great point, Matt. So thank you again. And really just thank you both so much for such an informative discussion today. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you both. And I'd also like to thank CareSignal for sponsoring today's webinar. For our audience members, if you are interested in learning about the content that was presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console and fill out the post-webinar survey. Otherwise, thank you all again so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.